Hey folks, I'm doing this video on the lunar eclipse in Taurus that's coming up on November the 30th, the 29th and the 30th. We're going to experience it the most on the 29th. It goes into the next day if you're here in the US, on the west coast of the US. But it'll be in Taurus. You can see here's the chart. This is November 30th. And it's opposite the Sun, Ketu, Mercury in Scorpio. And you see Moon Rahu opposite in Taurus, Rohini Nakshatra here. You see Jupiter will have moved into Capricorn, and Venus is still in Libra. Mars is in Aries up here. So these full moons are, it's a full moon and a lunar eclipse. And it's when, the reason you can tell that it's an eclipse is because we have the sun and the moon opposite, and the lunar node is there. So when the sun joins the node, this is when we have the eclipses. And when the sun joins the node, then that month we have the eclipses on the new moon and the full moon. So this, on the 30th, we have, or the end of the 29th into the 30th, we have the full moon, which means that the Earth moves in between the sun and the moon. The shadow of the Earth casts upon the moon, blocking the sunlight, reflecting back, because all the light is sun's light. And then 2 weeks later, when the moon comes around here, then the moon blocks the Earth. The moon blocks the sunlight from reaching the Earth. You imagine the Earth is in the middle here, and it makes more sense as well. So the lunar node is that axis where those orbits of the sun, moon, and Earth come together. And so that axis point is always there, but then you need the sun to line up with it, and then the moon. So all three line up. So this is a very sort of celestial cosmic event. To say that eclipses, happen all the time would not be correct. They're rare. They don't happen that often. It's about 1 day per year is filled with an eclipse. Now you're saying, what do you mean? There are 4 eclipses. Yeah, but I'm talking about the measurement of time. So they're predictable, and they're not uncommon because they happen regularly, but they're also of a rare duration. Literally 1/365th of the time are we having an eclipse. If you added up all the hours, usually solar eclipses take 2 hours or so, throughout the duration of the full eclipse. You might say 2-3 hours. So there's a couple of them. Lunar eclipses maybe about 6 hours total duration. So you wind up, again, the aggregate, if you added up all the time, about a day, which isn't that long. So again, when these events happen, it brings together body, mind, and spirit. Body is the Earth, because you've incarnated with this body on the Earth. The body belongs to the Earth. And then the mind is the moon, the manas, the consciousness that goes with us from lifetime to lifetime, where all the karma is and all the feeling of being alive, and that connection to the soul, to the universal self, which is the sun, the supreme self, the Paramatman. So eclipses, all three line up. And then one of the luminaries is eclipsed as they line up. So in this case, it's the moon that's eclipsed. And it's the moon being eclipsed by the Earth. So it's like the mind and feeling nature being sort of eclipsed by our experience. And again, because our experience is shown through the body. And again, the eclipses show these sort of darkness where the luminary is plunged into a state of darkness and confusion for a while. And again, during the time of the eclipse, you might even say that day, but certainly while it's happening, it's said to not eat, to fast, to do spiritual practices, to try to align with something which is beyond just the body-mind complex, and really connect with something pure. So in general, that day on the 29th, it's good for doing, authentic spiritual practices, meditation, pranayama, mantra, asanas. The yoga practices are great because they naturally align and move the energy. And, scientifically, they, bring about that opening of the chakras and that alignment. And again, taking a little less food is, can certainly be good because it brings about a kind of transcendent nature, and we can be sort of light at that time. Again, the lunar eclipse is, where the mind becomes, again, sort of cast into darkness, but it's a full moon, right? So again, it happens on the full moon where we're very full of our emotional state, very lit up in our mind, but then it's plunged into darkness. So then we also have to look at the dignity of the planets here. We have to look at this moon. This is an exalted moon here, pretty high exalted state. It's in its Mula Trikona state, I guess, is more accurate. It's the sign of exaltation, but it's in the Mula Trikona position, which is from 3 degrees to 20 degrees of Taurus. So it's a very powerful moon, and it's this, place where, the moon is exalted in Taurus because the energy is very solid and connected, just like the earth sits on the water. The water sits on the earth, literally in nature. And when the earth is, it's like a stable place for the water or the feeling to rest upon. This is why Taurus is overall the most, benevolent place for the moon, even more so than its own sign of Cancer, I think, where emotions tend to get more magnified. In Taurus, they can really be settled and still and stable. So having this eclipse will be important, and this is the first eclipse that we've had since the nodes moved into this axis a couple months ago. And so this this movement into Taurus is really reflective of how we've shifted into a mindset of wanting things to be more stable, more solid. The node had been in Gemini. Rahu had been in Gemini, Ketu in Sagittarius for a year and a half. That shifted around the middle of September. And so since then, it's been more, wanting more stability, something more solid, more reliable, and sort of digging down into, the roots of our life. That includes, even things in culture and whatnot, really kind of doubling down now on what we think is stable and solid and peaceful and connected. And so this eclipse is, has a lot of that potential, where, again, I'm not going to talk so much about things, cultural or whatnot. I'm going to keep this more in the personal realm. Also, because you have more of the, cultural, political, social realm with the solar eclipse, because that's where the that's where all three come together. The lunar eclipse is like in the middle of another cycle, and it's more psychological and emotional to some extent. But what we're really all trying to grasp, collectively and individually now with Rahu and Taurus, is how much stability we have, and what is really solid underneath our feet. Like what is the solid ground beneath our feet that is actual. What is what can we rely on? And that can be like in our family, in our social life, like in our external life, but most importantly in our own heart, in our own consciousness. Because regardless of what the world is doing, fascinating us with some play of illusion and shadow and whatever is going on out here, we're a transcendent being. We've incarnated. This isn't our whole life. In fact, we're just a blip. Even this lifetime is like a blip on the screen of our entire soul's evolution. We came here now because of past karma. We'll fade away at some point. It'll be over. We like to think that we've made a big impact, or we're going to be remembered or important, maybe for a while, but then life goes on. A couple generations, nobody remembers who the heck we are. And, even if they do, we're not here to, our ego isn't here to be validated. Again, we're a universal being. We're a transcendent soul being. And we get very enamored with life. Eclipses really bring, in some ways, they bring the potential of our attachments into focus. Full moons and lunar eclipses really bring a lot of the emotion into it, a lot of the emotional attachment and charge, and like, yes, this is really me. This is really me. Full moons have that quality because the moon is full, and the moon is literally like our emotions. It's our feeling. It's that feeling that we're alive, this feeling that, yes, this is me. And it really feels like it's me. It feels real. And I got all these emotions about who I am. And they're real. I'm really this. So even in a natal chart, when the moon is really bright, the person feels very much a part of life, right? When the moon is really dark, like people who are born near new moons, when the moon is really dark, one of the qualities of a really dark moon is the person doesn't feel so, it's not that they don't feel alive, it's that their identity, that attachment and that identity to their memories and emotions and family and all of that stuff that makes us feel like, yes, I live on this earth and it's me and it's real, which comes from the moon. A lot of that is really hard to hold on to when the moon is really dark, which is what happens with dark moons or moons that are waning and they're really dark. There's not so much of that attachment and that desire and that intensity, that emotional intensity. So full moons always have that quality. And then when it's eclipsed, it's going to sort of eclipse that charge. So again, we have these qualities of Taurus, where the moon is exalted, where it feels stable. So again, I'm just trying to bring together the kind of parameters here. It's full moon, so it's very bright, and we feel very attached, and we're like, yes, I'm full. This is my feeling, right? It's in Taurus, which is also where it's exalted, and in its Mula Trikona, where it's very stable. But then it's also eclipsed by Rahu, the north node. Rahu's eclipse influence is to extend things toward the future, like it creates a restlessness and an excitement about the possibilities, like especially about the future. Rahu creates a lot of excitement about what's next, what's coming next, and wanting to extend things outward and blow them up a little bit. The K2 end of the node eclipses by withdrawing things, by concentrating things internally, by focusing much more internally, and also, again, with a certain amount maybe sort of dissatisfaction with Ketu because we feel like we've been there and done that. Now that's where the sun is. We'll talk about that. I already just did a video on that eclipse, at least the Sun Ketu eclipse in Scorpio. I'll do another one about it, though, when I talk more about worldly things. But the Rahu end of the eclipse, Rahu eclipsing the moon, can tend to really want to extend these feelings where we feel very, almost like a sort of elated emotional state. So there's a real benefit to this, though, especially when you keep in mind all of the spiritualizing factors that I talked about, especially that when you know your nature, when you know your true nature, that you're not just this organism, this hunk of meat, this body, this physical body, which comes from the earth, or you're not just this bundle of emotions, this emotional body. When you remember that, then you can extend these variables. And so instead of just being full of emotion and getting emotional amplitude, like big waves in the water, Rahu eclipsing the moon, or when Rahu, like a Rahu moon conjunction, even in a natal chart, shows where the feeling qualities that are so personalized, that are so individualized, because again, the moon is that my feelings, my emotions, my lived experience, it's really me. I have these feelings and they came because of this, and we're so attached to our emotions. Instead, Rahu, when it interacts with the moon, it really kind of blows that thing open, like extends it. So many times Rahu moon brings like sort of boundaries, like emotional boundaries become very extended. In fact, even a kind of like emotional intuition, even like a kind of psychic quality. Again, there's many kinds of psychic abilities. All the planets have a psychic ability, but the moon is more about like being able to feel something more than just our own emotions. So our own feelings and emotions become more extended and more, like sort of thrust out into something more universalized and transpersonal. So it's not as personal. Now, again, what that means, particularly when you consider this is an exalted moon in Taurus, where there's a lot of groundedness and a lot of rootedness, where things are rooted, is it shows an enormous possibility for greater devotion, which is really the nature of the moon. The emotions are just on the surface. The emotions are just our feelings, our feeling nature, and our pure love, that pure love in our heart, which is really what the moon is. That pure love in our heart interacting with the surface of the world. So again, the emotions are literally our true, devotional, selfless, loving capacity interacting with the triviality and limitations of the world and the limited interactions of the world. So it's literally like the emotions are how the ego experiences the heart, the true heart, the depth of the heart. Not the emotions that come and go, but the true, deep heart, love, devotional space that doesn't want anything from anybody, that doesn't feel sad when we don't get what we want, that doesn't feel afraid or this or that or all that stuff we go through. That's all just emotion. And that's literally how our ego experiences our heart. But on a deeper level, our heart, on a soul level, is much more transcendent. That's why we have emotional suffering. If we were just emotions, then we wouldn't suffer. We wouldn't know the difference between this limited form of feeling. These are my feelings, and we usually describe our emotions. I love them and I hate them. I love this, I hate this. This duality is the ego's experience of the heart. Well, if that was all we were capable of, why would it matter? Why would we care? We wouldn't know any difference. Well, because there's something much deeper in there that's suffering, where that's just suffering. In fact, it's even the part of us that knows to be suspicious of something that's good, because we know, well, I thought it was good before, and then this thing that I thought was so good winds up being just as bad. So I'm really just kind of on an emotional roller coaster. It's really just like waves in the ocean. There's a big wave, but under the big wave, there's a trough. And there's this big wave of good thing, then there's a good big wave of bad thing, or whatever you want to call it. So this is creating a big wave. This is a big wave. Exalted moon. Again, even just a full moon in Taurus would be like, okay, a time for a lot of emotion and the capacity to transform all of that emotional volume. Instead of a bunch of big waves, like, instead of the roller coaster of waves, it's now you bring Rahu in there and you eclipse it. Again, it sends all of that into a lot of extreme directions, but also a lot of depth here. That's where the exalted and the Taurus part comes in. The best way to really look at the example is what I just talked about, is we can look at and I always use this example of emotions, and the heart is like the ocean. And we can stay on the surface of the heart, and the surface of the ocean, you know, people surf on it and boats go up and down, and it's on the surface. You're just bobbing up and down. It's often just little waves, but then every now and then we get a big wave and a big thing comes. But that's just riding up and down on the surface. But when you break the surface, you go down into the depths, into the depth. That's meditation. That's devotion. That's bhakti. It's literally the Sanskrit word for devotion is bhakti. And again, it's bhakti. Bhakti yoga is where we develop and we use practices that transform all of those tidal waves of emotion, and we transform that into devotion. So when there's something more eternal that we're devoted to, where we don't have all of our desires involved, then we can connect more to our true nature, because that is our true nature. Our true nature is that devotion and that pure love. That's our true nature. And we feel that when we're able to withdraw from all of our desires and find a place of stillness and peace. What do you think we're getting stillness and peace from? Talk about stillness and peace. What do you think it's stillness and peace from? It's from our emotions. Again, even our thoughts come from emotions or feelings. Thoughts are just, is interpreting some feeling. A feeling comes and then a thought comes to try to understand what the feeling is. Or sometimes we start going with thoughts and then they create feelings, but they're very much part of the same stuff, the chitta. It's called chitta. And the first thing in yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which is yoga is stilling the thought waves in the mind. Thought waves and emotions, they're like the same thing. We tend to think they're very different. They're really not. Where does an emotion and your thought or feeling about it, where does one begin and the other end? It's all the same stuff. And it's driven by desire. And desire is driven by ego, which means your separate self, because you think you're this separate thing. This separate thing now wants some things and wants to avoid other things. There's now good and bad. And we're in duality, and the mind is dualistic. I want this. I want to reject that. This makes me happy. This makes me sad. This emotion, this thought, this feeling. And we're just, it's all ego. So again, when eclipses come or when full moons come, exaltations come, I'm putting them all now in the same place. They're all kind of moments where there's a wave that gets bigger. This is a big wave because you've got several things here. A full moon, exalted sign. Again, this is big possibility, but then eclipse, which makes something even bigger. So when the wave gets bigger, the potential gets bigger. And also the potential to just go bonkers gets bigger, frankly. And I like to talk about it as a range of potential, not as some, it's going to be bad. Sorry, but like never get too far away from all that. And this frustrates some people where they say, will you just say, is it going to be good or bad? So which one is it? Wait a second. Because I also know that every moment is just potential. It's just being on a wave. And you have to ride the wave. As someone who's started surfing a little bit, I didn't do very good at it, and I'll probably take it up again a little bit more at some point. You see these little waves, and you get on these little waves, and they take you a little bit, you know, they don't take you very far, but they're also safer. You're not going to hurt yourself. You see a big wave coming, and it's like, whoa, I don't know if I can ride that wave. That one's pretty big. But if you're able to get on top of that wave and surf it and ride it, that big wave is also going to take you a lot further. And that big wave is, you know, a lunar eclipse anywhere is a big wave. In Taurus is even a bigger wave because it has a lot of potential there. And particularly this potential for devotion, bhakti, your spiritual practices can really, really go deep now. And it doesn't have to be November 29th. It's between now and then, and even after. Because again, the eclipses they just bring out the nodal position. That's why I started at the beginning talking about Rahu is in Taurus and Ketu is in Scorpio. The nodes have been there for a couple months. So that shift already happened, and it's already been trying to bring us into this more, you know, into a way that's more, you know, where Rahu and Taurus is really helping us gravitate toward things that are stable and solid, that revolve around our values and the deeper value, and, you know, where we, you know, develop a better relationship with our senses and people and food and attachments. All of these are the qualities of Taurus that Rahu is trying to develop and has been for a couple months. That's just been there. It's kind of percolating on, you know, behind the scenes. In fact, I even made a big part of my election prediction based on Rahu moving into Taurus, and that we were collectively looking for things to be more stable and solid, as an example. So that stable, solid part has been there for a while. But now when the eclipses start happening there, that's when we really start to feel like we feel this new shift. It becomes actualized, it becomes lived. Then we'll have a solar, you know, we'll have a lunar eclipse here, then we'll have a solar eclipse a couple weeks later. There'll be several eclipse cycles in this axis. So this is the first eclipse cycle in that axis, and the first one is this exalted full moon in Taurus. And again, this is one of the reasons why I totally also align with this idea that the nodes are exalted here. Again, some people have made other ideas before about how the nodes aren't exalted here. This is one of the reasons why. Because again, when you get Rahu in Taurus, it's also very stable. And then the moon comes where it's also exalted and joins Rahu. This is one of those moments where you see some of these principles really line up. And this Rahu bringing this sort of attachment and obsession with stability, because Rahu has already been trying to do that. And then the moon comes there and joins Rahu there. And that's also an attachment and a fascination and a desire for stability. Then we're able to sink deeper into the heart. So you want to really keep that in mind. And again, like I said, spiritual practices, especially that might revolve around things like food not food, that revolve around devotional practices, you know, really connecting to the heart. Of course, breathing, all classical yoga techniques are fantastic between now and then, but you'll really feel them on the eclipse. Now, it's also in the nakshatra of Rohini. Rohini means growth and growing. It's said to be the most beautiful of and the most pleasant of the wives of the moon. And Rohini is very creative in the sense of, literally it could be things like art and music, or, dance or something. It's that part of Taurus that it exists only in Taurus. It doesn't cross over into other signs. And the deity is Prajapati, Lord Brahma. He was later called, but Prajapati is the creator. And it literally shows how not only do we create things in life, like as an artist, or even when you're cooking a meal, you're creating it. It didn't exist before, and you're making it. You're creating it. Everyone is creative. Humans are creative, just in general. All animals are on one level. They all create something. You want to see creativity, watch a beaver. Beavers are some of the most fascinating animals in the world. They create dams. And so most animals are creative in one way or another. At the very least, they create life itself that perpetuates. But so human beings have a more refined intelligence and creative gifts. So we create other things. Again, not just art and music or whatnot, but ultimately, frankly, ourself. And that's what we're here to do. We're actually here to create ourself in a higher sense. And the story even of this nakshatra, and the story of Prajapati, who creates his daughter Rohini to create and to sustain and to perpetuate life, is also a metaphor for how the one created the many, and then the many, the multiplicity, then refers back to the oneness as well. So the highest form of creativity is, of course, spiritual creativity. It's always the plight, most great artists at some point, they reach a point where creating like a song or a painting, it's a spiritual experience for them. And at some point, it's kind of an intermediary spiritual step, that kind of creativity. And ultimately, most great artists at some point are, they connect with some other kind of direct spiritual inspiration. Sometimes they even do it through things like drugs and alcohol, or some way to transcend the mundane. Of course, because we have great teachings, we don't have to do it through impure ways like drugs and whatnot. We can do it through meditation. And again, that's what the ultimate creativity is about. The highest creativity is not necessarily something that comes into existence that other human beings can enjoy and can marvel at, but is still limited by time and space. The highest creativity is the transcendent creativity. And that's that's the real seed idea and principle behind Rohini, is that, again, that sense of beauty and joy that comes from creativity itself. And again, the most beautiful thing, the most enjoyable and favored wife, the one that Chandra, the moon god, enjoyed being with the most, was Rohini. She was the most beautiful, but also the most pleasant, the most, again, creative and enjoyable. So again, this is in Taurus, and it should also show you the quality of how a big part of being creative, and about being creative even in a spiritual sense, is that you need to align it needs to be a function of your heart's desire of something that is beautiful. If spirituality is just another transaction, like, all right, I'll meditate. If I calm down, if I get peace of mind, I'll meditate. All right. Forget it. It ain't going to happen. Because we never do that. We do what we feel like doing, what makes us happy, what we find beautiful, what we enjoy. That's one of the reasons why the greatest blessing is to have a guru and a teacher that you love, that you're devoted to, where there's devotion. Because then your spiritual practice becomes a devotional practice to something that you love. And it's not an effort that you're going to get something from. Again, it's not to criticize it, because it'll work on that level as well, but it usually won't be as consistent, and it won't be juicy. For example, the reason parents keep taking care of their children is because they love their children. There's love there, so there's no effort. We won't take care of other people. Why? They're still people. You won't take care of other people's children, probably. Why? Because you just don't love them as much, frankly. But when there's love, there's no effort. And that love and beauty is in itself a creative act. It's the most creative thing you can do. Everything that you have created in your life, you created it because there was love there. Because you loved that thing so much that it can't pull you away from it. You're going to keep creating it even if you exhaust yourself because you love it. And so again, these are all virtues of, this is all Taurus energy. This is the nature of Taurus. It's ruled by Venus. It takes that love and that beauty and concentrates it into a solid form, into something that's really stable and solid, like in our life. So it becomes like a bulwark, like a structure, that like a support of our entire life. So again, this is very ripe time of spiritual transformation, especially through beauty, connecting to the heart, being devoted, devotional practices. Again, this is why there's always why the greatest blessing is to have practices that you love and beings. Like I say, I'm blessed to have a guru, Amma, who I met. Before I met Amma, I did practices, but it wasn't nearly as consistent. It wasn't as beautiful. It wasn't as, I didn't have a personal experience with the guru or things like that. When that gets introduced, it's a whole other level then. And so those things in your life that inspire you to beauty and the highest, and that inspire you to actually, do your practices and create yourself in a higher level, on a higher dimension, will be sort of catapulted into another level now, between now and that eclipse. And as we get closer, you can see it, you can feel it coming about. And I think we should look for, on a larger scale, some great signs of things working out, of difficulties and things we're scared of kind of working out on a higher level. There's so much difficulty going on now, and so much pressure and energy, and we've had a resurgence of COVID and things like that, and none of that is great news. We just found out today that some of these vaccines are going to be coming. There's a lot of hope right around the corner. In some ways, we're not feeling as hopeful yet because there's still quite a bit of stuck energy, but we're getting into this cycle now where we're going to start to see and feel a lot more of that. Like, okay, things are, we're working through some of these things, which I think will also be on a collective level. We'll see some of that. But I want to talk more about your lived experience at this time and not getting so, boondoggled by all of the stuff in the world. Again, one of the things is one of the practices with full moon, with full moons, but especially lunar eclipses, is the fasting. So that day on the 29th, think of doing a fast. Hang on a second. Or even just maybe not eat solid food, or one of the things I end up doing is juicing or just blending, like I have there. It's kind of like a meal blended with greens and other stuff in a Vitamix blender, so you just kind of drink your meals that day, so that there's lightness, so that you're light. The reason that's good is powerful is because that light mind, it's much easier to meditate, because if you're doing what you should be doing that day, again, the fastest way to not be able to meditate is to eat too much food, and you sit down to meditate and you want to go to sleep, or you get gas, or you're farting. Eat garlic before you meditate, and all you're doing is smelling garlic the whole time. This is why a lot of those foods aren't part of the yoga diet. It's not necessarily because they're not healthy, like garlic and onions and whatnot. It's because they disturb your meditation. If you don't think they do, eat onions and garlic and then try to meditate. What happens is, again, you're just smelling your own garlic breath for like 3 hours, right? So this is why, taking less food can be really is a great spiritual practice anyway. We generally eat too much, at least people in the West. So that's a great practice to engage in as well. So the a few other things about this time is we have again we have Venus is in Libra. So again, this is really a time to be able to connect with that beauty, because again the eclipse is happening in Taurus, and the ruler Venus is very powerful and calm. In Libra, it shows a lot of intelligence and not agitated, not so agitated, right? It's going to go into Scorpio. It was in Virgo, but in Libra, it has a very harmonious nature, and so that'll be beneficial as well. Again, we have Sun, Mercury, Ketu are in Scorpio. They're opposite. So again, wherever the Sun is so important in any lunar eclipse, because it's opposite where the Sun is. And we have Sun Ketu in Scorpio. So again, one of the things that's really going on with the Sun in Scorpio is we have there's a lot of sort of amped up energy right now, because the Sun is going through Scorpio, trying to illuminate a lot of potential difficulty and darkness and struggle, and there's quite a bit of that hanging out right now with a lot of the worldly actions and whatnot. And again, this is why I talk about more worldly stuff on the solar eclipses, because we're seeing a lot of the actions come from that. We can see the social implications, though, often coming from the full moon. So again, there will be a feeling of wanting to stabilize all of that restlessness as we get closer to the full moon and we get closer to this eclipse. So again, Taurus is trying to stabilize the restlessness of Scorpio, just in general. So that desire to want to stabilize, and the fullness of that, and the power to do it because it's exalted, is really strong. So it means is when you sit down to do your meditations and you really dial it in, especially as the moon gets closer. The day before, it's also exalted in Kritika Nakshatra, and then it goes into Rohini, and then the day after it's in Mrigashira, then goes into Gemini. But so that whole time, as we're getting closer to that, when we dial in and when we tune in, there's going to be all that potential is there. So that's what the astrology is showing. It's showing the environment, the stable Taurus environment the day before, and then when we're having the eclipse, all that stability can just take you into the depths of the heart. So rather than being like a ship tossed about on the ocean of drama, you can sink down into that peace that's underneath it all. And, we have Saturn, Jupiter here in Capricorn. By that time, Jupiter will be almost 2 degrees in Capricorn, which is good. And again, you could say, oh, it's debilitated. Yeah, but it's also joined Saturn, its ruler. Anytime the planet is joined its ruler, it brings about a great, also a great level of stability to it. So Saturn is there, even though Jupiter is in a debilitated sign. It's Guru, which is still teacher, and it's with Saturn, which is like the old master or the old sage. And the sage is there. He's bringing he's bringing seriousness into the teachings. So again, don't get bamboozled and tricked by simplistic astrology. The entire time that Jupiter is going to be debilitated, that people are so worried about, the ruler is going to be there. He's going to go through actually pretty quick. And so again, anytime the ruler is there, it forms a very powerful Neecha Bhanga, which modifies the debilitation and actually turns it into a source of enormous strength. So again, we'll see that it's pretty close conjunction here, Saturn, Jupiter as well. So again, that really brings the teachings and the wisdom, which is Jupiter, into that level of application and mastery and fortification and the willingness to do the work, which is Saturn. That determination and the ability to sit still and just be simple. And that's the greatness of Saturn, is it slows things down and makes things very simple. When Saturn is in Capricorn or Aquarius, but particularly Capricorn, it really slows it down and just, it almost gives the awareness that the best thing I can do is just kind of sit here and be still. Now, we actually have experienced Saturn in Capricorn since right when COVID started last year. So we experienced that, right? COVID started and it's like, okay, now everybody stay home, be locked in your house. And again, it's very hard to do it. We get impatient, but there's also, if you're tuned in at all, there's a joy about things are simple. It makes things simple. Again, there's a lot of complications, so I'm not saying all of us want this, but again, there's a simplicity and a simple beauty about like, okay, I know what I'm doing today, and it's not going out doing whatever I could think of. It's being here, and my limited options can also be a great blessing. You know, yogis pray to have a simple life. So again, Saturn, Jupiter can really be supporting now this application of your teachings, so that it's not just some philosophy that you believe in, but it's something that you practice, or you have to practice. So again, also notice, if you believe a whole bunch of stuff, but you're not really practicing it, you're going to feel it now. You're going to be feeling it for the next few months. So instead of just crying about it, notice it. Notice how you believe a whole bunch of stuff that you don't really practice, and practice it. Instead of cry about it, practice it. That's all you need to do. Right? Instead of, again, bypassing the experience. You know, Jupiter is great for finding teachers and gurus and wisdom, but it's not practicing necessarily. Really, Saturn and Mars are the ones that practice it. So great time for implementing. And then lastly, we have Mars in Aries, which is showing, again, like the spiritual warrior, to really, you know, have the discipline. Mars is the discipline to do what we know is right. And again, Pisces is a very kind of mystical, metaphysical space where we can really sense that, which is more of like a unity consciousness, unifying consciousness, not necessarily, you know, where we don't necessarily want to fight over things so much. I mean, there's fighting going on always to some extent, but again, especially for spiritual people, or even in a larger sense with Mars and Pisces, we realize that there's something bigger, and that there might be something bigger, you know, behind the scenes, behind it all. By the way, we are even seeing that in the culture now with, again, I don't want to spin out too much on things of the world, but again, with the politics or the conspiracies, or now we have the Great Reset and the things that might be what's really going on. A lot of that has some Pisces energy for sure. And Mars there, maybe getting frustrated about some of that stuff in the background. But again, rather than spinning out on all that nonsense, I say nonsense, not because it's all untrue, but because it's not present right now. Here and now, you're here and now. You might have a bunch of ideas about all that stuff and be getting worked up about it, but that's a waste of your Mars energy, because your Mars energy is trying to give you discipline right now. He's saying right now, and I mean literally right now, you have the choice to align your energy one way or another. You can do this thing or you can do that thing. What are you doing? That's what Mars is about. What are you doing? Are you actually doing the practices? Are you doing the things that you know are right? Or are you actually doing something like surfing the Instagram or Facebook feed and spinning out on something and doing that and doing that and doing, because that's still a doing. You're still doing something. Mars is literally just as simple as what we're doing. Are we doing what we know is right? Are we under the illusion that all the stuff we think is, that we know is real? I just know it because, oh, what about that? What about that? I know it. Do we really know it? Or do we just believe it somehow in some amorphous because it's all related somehow to something. So now I'm all worked up about something, and I'm not really doing anything that I have control over. And again, Mars is also wanting the control. I have control of my energy every moment, and it's only up to me. It's completely my responsibility to align my energy with this thing rather than that thing. Again, even things like eat this food, not that food, wake up at this time, not that time, do this practice, not that practice. That's Mars. So we've been kind of, in Pisces, it's a little bit like, whoa, but be aware of that and get ready, because then when Mars goes into Aries, it's much more focused on that action. But these are, you know, some of the planets in the background that are going on. So anyway, I hope this full moon that I covered, this full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus, a lot going on. The moon is full, which again brings a lot of magnitude and volume into the feelings and the emotions, and also the potential to go deeper than that. The potential to harness that volume, and that, again, when you look up, you see the moon is very bright when it's full. Harness that energy and bring greater stability so that you can sink down into the heart, into the true nature. But again, it's going to be eclipsed. So it would be bright if it wasn't eclipsed. The darkness comes over, and there's stress and fear and worry that maybe I'm not connected, or I don't feel solid, I don't feel stable, I don't know what my values are, I don't know. Okay, so it brings that kind of restlessness. That's why your practices will be big. Again, and if you don't have practices, again, even just things like you know, remembering what I'm saying here, and even things like listening to sacred music and just relaxing and settling into the moment. Again, a little bit of fasting. You don't have to completely fast, but taking a little less food, keeping the vibration light in the mind. Because the moon is exalted, you know, because it's in Taurus and it's in Rohini, it's a very gentle place for the moon. So it really facilitates a deeper connection. You could have a transformative, mind-blowing experience in the next few days, especially if you don't do meditation very much, or it's something that's kind of new. It could be a total catalyst event. Of course, I never know, because I don't know what people's dashas are. I don't know where it's hitting in your chart. All of those specifics make it different, but the potential is really there for a great sort of spiritual awakening. So see, there's a lot of comments here, and I appreciate them. Usually I just have to kind of get through these talks, because I don't want to get too sidetracked. So, but I would appreciate, you know, if people were to share this, you know, with others. If you think it will be helpful, share it and like the video, and all of that. Because I think these things are helpful to each other, and, you know, are helpful to people. So again, you take care, and we'll be in touch.